In June 1944, Normandy's bocage shook under German armored forces, commanded in the west by General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, with field responsibility in northern France under General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel's army group. B. Panzergruppe West, under General der Panzertruppe Leo Geyer von Schweppenburg, committed elite formations such as Panzerlehr Division, led by General Major Fritz Bayerlein. These formations, operating against Allied armor around Caen and in the American sector farther west, soon met the flood of M4 Sherman tanks. The United States was landing in France. The U.S. had produced 49234 Shermans from February 1942 to July 1945, guaranteeing a constant flow of replacements to the front. German tank crews, looking through their sights and periscopes, compared the Sherman to their Panzerkampfwagen V Panther and to the heavy Tigers. The Sherman's armor was thinner, vulnerable at around 1,000 yards to the Panther's 7.5 centimeters Quabu K-42, and its standard 75 mm gun struggled against the Panther's sloped glacis. In the first days, German crews really did have grounds to be confident. Technically, their tanks outmatched the average Allied tank. But within weeks, that confidence began to erode. German units dug into the hedgerows, watched Shermans get knocked out, recovered, and reappear. A Panther that threw a track or was hit by artillery in daylight often became a total loss because recovering it under Allied fighter-bomber patrols was risky or impossible. The Allies, by contrast, operated a whole ecosystem of recovery and repair. Close behind the line, damaged Shermans were towed by M32 recovery vehicles, built on the same chassis, and standardized parts meant a turret, bogie, or suspension. Unit could be swapped quickly. U.S. forces had pre-built logistics in the United Kingdom and pushed them across the beachhead, so the U.S. First Army under Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley could keep armored battalions topped up. German recovery depended on fewer specialized vehicles, such as Berge Panthers on road movement at night, because of Allied air superiority, and on crews who already had to service complex powertrains. Under Normandy conditions, short move stop-start, fighting soft ground air threat. Panther units needed intensive maintenance to stay running, and that strained German mechanics. Meanwhile, the decisive number was still 4,9,2,3,4 Shermans versus roughly 5,976 Panthers. Every Panther lost or abandoned hurt the Germans far more than a Sherman loss hurt the Americans. Around Caen, German armored forces could and did win straight gunfights against Allied tanks. A single Panther could knock out several Shermans in open country. But Allied armor kept returning to the fight because the Anglo-American system emphasized repair, rotation, and replacement at scale. Allied air superiority forced German columns into night marches, which slowed recovery of disabled vehicles. Reports from Panzerlehr by late June showed heavy losses not only from direct combat, but from vehicles that had to be left behind in withdrawals. What German crews had laughed at as a simpler tank turned out to be exactly what made it dangerous. The Sherman was easy to build, easy to tow, easy to fix, and it came back. In the bocage, U.S. crews adapted, flanked, and used numbers to overwhelm isolated German tanks. The technical edge of Panther and Tiger was real, but it became hollow as Allied numbers and recovery rolled them back. The Normandy campaign, unfolding through July 1944, exposed the grinding truth of armored warfare. German armored forces, including 12 SS Panzer Division Hitler-Jugend around Caen and elements of 2 Panzer Division committed to holding the Allied bridgehead, tried to contain a front that was steadily expanding under Allied pressure. Their Panthers and Tigers, lethal in tank-to-tank fighting, were shackled by logistics. Germany produced about 5,976 Panthers during the war, and fewer than 2,000 Tigers of all variants. Every vehicle lost in Normandy hurt because replacements reached the front only slowly under Allied air interdiction. The United States, by contrast, could lean on roughly 4, 9, 2, 3, 4 M4 Shermans, produced between 1,942 and 1,945, a scale of output that ensured tanks kept appearing at the line. U.S. ordnance and maintenance units working from forward depots just behind the bocage, swapped standardized components, and returned knocked-out Shermans to service in a short time. German crews near St. Lo, or opposite the American sector, could feel the Panthers' superiority whenever they got a clear shot. The 7.5 centimeters KBUK, 42 liters, 70, could penetrate Sherman armor at around 1,000 yards, while the Sherman's standard 75 millimeters gun struggled against the Panther's sloped frontal plate. But the pattern after each engagement favored the Americans. U.S. recovery teams came in under cover of their own artillery and air, using M32 recovery vehicles based on the Sherman chassis to pull out tanks with thrown tracks or damaged suspensions. Many of these repairs were done close to the front under canvas or in field workshops, so serviceable Shermans reappeared in the battalion roster. German recovery, relying on fewer Panthers and forced onto night movement because of Allied fighter bombers, often failed to reach stranded Panthers before artillery or airstrikes finished them off. A Panther, immobilized by a mine or track damage, could easily become a total loss if it was not recovered after dark. Under these conditions, maintenance on complex German tanks consumed scarce time, fuel, and crews. By July, the German perspective was shifting, the gun advantage was real, but American numbers and recovery blunted it. U.S. tank battalions closely integrated with infantry and backed by artillery and air from the U.S. First Army under Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley kept up pressure and exploited any German withdrawal. Allied air superiority punished German columns on the exposed roads of Normandy, forcing them into slower night marches and further delaying recovery. Some heavy German tanks, short of fuel or tow capacity, were scuttled by their crews to prevent capture. American records from 1944 show that a notable share of Shermans first listed as knocked out were repaired and reissued, which built confidence among U.S. tank crews that their combat strength would be restored. By late July, as Operation Cobra was being prepared to break open the German line, the contrast became stark. The Americans needed large numbers of runners to exploit a breakthrough toward Brittany, and their system could provide them. German formations committed to Normandy, including 116. Panzer Division, as it came into the fighting, reported dwindling numbers of operational Panthers, with recovery slowed by fuel shortages, damaged bridges, and constant air threat. The constraint was not German gunnery, but German logistics. A Sherman repaired in a few days was back in the fight faster than a Panther that had to be abandoned in a retreat. The Sherman's design, with interchangeable parts, and an entire chain of recovery vehicles, built on the same chassis, meant a damaged tank was not automatically a permanent loss. That is the arc the Germans faced in Normandy. They could win duels, but they could not win against a system that kept bringing Shermans back. In late July 1944, the U.S. First Army opened Operation Cobra from the St. Lo sector to break the Normandy front that had been static since June. The capture of St. Lo created passages for American armored divisions whose M4 Shermans began pushing south and southwest toward Avranches and into the open country of Brittany, while follow-on operations in August would drive east toward the Seine. Behind this tempo was U.S. mass production, with roughly 4, 9, 2, 3, 4 Shermans built between 1,942 and 1,945 American battalions in France could be kept close to establishment strength even after hard fighting. German armored formations that had already been worn down in June and July, such as Panzerlehr Division, mauled in earlier fighting in 12. SS Panzer Division Hitler Jugend, tied down in the Caen sector, were forced to pull back toward what would become the Falaise area under heavy Allied artillery and air attack. Germany's about 5,976 Panthers, built for the whole war plus fewer Tigers, were already spread across multiple fronts. Every vehicle abandoned in Normandy narrowed German options. American recovery vehicles followed close behind the advance, hauling damaged Shermans back to field workshops where standardized parts made repairs fast. South of Caen, and along the American axis of advance, German crews in Panthers could still win straight gunnery fights. At around 1,000 yards, the 7.5 centimeters KWK, 42 liters, 70 on the Panther, outperformed most Sherman's 75 millimeters guns and could penetrate U.S. tanks frontally. But the Normandy battlefield was not a set-piece duel. U.S. tankers fought with infantry, artillery, and fighter-bomber support using numbers and flanking to force Panthers to move or withdraw. When the shooting stopped, U.S. M32 recovery vehicles, built on the same Sherman chassis, went forward to pull out tanks with broken tracks or superficial fire damage and get them back to forward depots. German recovery, dependent on fewer Panthers and restricted to night because of Allied air superiority, often could not reach a disabled Panther in time. A tank that had only suffered track or suspension damage could still be left behind if movement in daylight risked air attack. Under these conditions, even repairable German vehicles were sometimes abandoned. By August, as the German position in Normandy began to fold and the Falaise pocket formed, this asymmetry became obvious to German commanders. Columns retreating through narrow roads under bridges, already attacked by Allied aircraft, had to destroy or scuttle Panthers and Tigers that lacked fuel or tow vehicles. Allied air power pinned German movements to the night and slowed recovery to a crawl. The Americans, meanwhile, were beginning to field Shermans with 76mm guns in Normandy, and British units operating alongside Americans employed Sherman Fireflies, armed with 17-pounders, reducing the firepower gap in tank versus tank encounters. U.S. 1,944 records show that a significant portion of Shermans first reported as knocked out were later repaired and reissued, which helped armored units sustain the pace set by Cobra. The pursuit across France exposed the underlying German weakness. It was not only that the Panther was complex, it was that the German logistical system in Normandy could not protect fuel and recover it under constant air pressure and continual retreat. A Tiger immobilized on a road became an obstacle, not a weapon. U.S. ordnance detachments operating under Allied air cover and benefiting from interchangeable Sherman components could turn damaged tanks around in short order, days, not weeks. The number that mattered was the American ability to keep putting Shermans back into line faster than German panzer units could replace or recover their Panthers. That is exactly the arc your title describes. German crews initially dismissed the M4 as inferior, but in the campaign's decisive phase, they were rolled back by a system that repaired, returned, and replaced Shermans faster than German armor could survive. As American tanks drove east after the collapse of German positions in Normandy, German crews, who had once dismissed the M4, finally faced a hard reality. A Panther's excellent gun mattered less when Shermans repaired and returned to service kept filling the line and pushing the campaign toward the Seine. By August 1944, the closing of the Falaise pocket marked a turning point in the armored fighting in France. U.S. forces using M4 Shermans as the spearhead of exploitation pressed through the gaps left by withdrawing German formations. American armored divisions, soon operating under Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley's 12th Army Group, from 1 August 1944, could be kept close to strength because the United States had built about 49234 Shermans over the course of the war. German panzer units, by contrast, had to make do with a wartime total of roughly 5976 Panthers and under 2000 Tigers, spread across several fronts. Tanks damaged by artillery air attack or breakdown in Normandy were often lost for good. Along the Seine approaches and in the Argentan area, German tank crews could still win individual engagements. A Panther, firing its 7.5 centimeters Keeball UK 42 liters, 70 at about 1,000 yards, could penetrate a Sherman and a careless U.S. tank. Exposing its side could be destroyed at once. But the fighting was not decided by these duels. U.S. tank battalions advanced with infantry, artillery, and fighter-bomber cover. After each clash, American M32 recovery vehicles, built on the same Sherman chassis, moved up to tow out vehicles with broken tracks or damaged suspensions. Because the Sherman used standardized, interchangeable components, many of these tanks could be repaired in forward areas and reissued within days. German recovery, relying on fewer Panthers and forced to move mostly at night because of Allied air superiority, could not always reach Panthers that had only mobility damage. Fuel shortages and disrupted rail lines in France meant that an immobilized German tank frequently became a permanent loss. German reports from formations such as 2. Panzer Division in this period recorded losses not only from combat, but from air attack, breakdown, and abandonment during withdrawal. At the same time, U.S. units were beginning to field Shermans with 76mm guns, and British formations fighting alongside them employed Sherman Fireflies with 17-pounder guns, narrowing the firepower gap against German armor, USA. Ordnance and maintenance records from 1944 show a significant proportion of Shermans, first listed as knocked out, later returned to service, which helped sustain the pace of the advance after Normandy. By late summer, the wartime image of the Panther and Tiger as untouchable was no longer the operational reality in France. The German problem was not that the Panther's gun or armor had suddenly become inferior, but that the German system in Normandy could not recover fuel and replace these tanks under constant air attack and retreat, while the American system could. With tens of thousands of Shermans built, and with recovery and repair pushed far forward, U.S. armored forces kept the pressure on, driving toward the Seine, and then on toward the German frontier. That is exactly the story your title tells. German crews laughed at the Sherman's lighter armor and smaller gun, but numbers and recovery rolled them back. The campaign's rhythm, American recovery outpacing German loss, set the stage for the Allied advance out of France and into Belgium and the Netherlands, where logistics, not tank duels, would shape the fighting. By autumn 1944, U.S. armored divisions, equipped with M4 Shermans, were moving toward Germany's western frontier. Because the United States had built about 49234 Shermans over the course of the war and pushed a full recovery and maintenance system forward, American battalions under Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley's 12th Army Group could stay near fighting strength after hard operations. German armored forces, including remnants of Panzerlehr Division and 116 Panzer Division that had already been worn down in Normandy, came forward again with fewer Panthers and Tigers. Germany's roughly 5,976 Panthers and under 2,000 Tigers, already committed on several fronts and now constrained by fuel and Allied air power, could not be replaced at the same pace. Crews who had once scorned the Sherman's lighter armor and smaller gun now had to fight while their own vehicles were being left behind for lack of fuel spares or safe recovery routes. In the Low Countries, U.S. tank infantry teams kept pressing through wet ground and close terrain, Shermans taking the lead. Newer Shermans with 76mm guns and British Shermans fitted with 17-pounders operating alongside reduced the tactical advantage German Panthers had enjoyed in mid-1944 and made German crews more cautious at typical Northern European battle ranges. After actions, American M32 recovery vehicles and other Sherman-based support machines pulled damaged tanks back to forward workshops. Standardized engines, tracks, and running gear meant many vehicles could be made serviceable again in days rather than weeks. German recovery, limited by few Berge Panthers, short fuel, and constant Allied air strafing, often could not reach a mobility-killed Panther in daylight. A Panther that suffered transmission or suspension damage under these conditions frequently became a static strongpoint instead of a mobile weapon. Allied air forces forced German columns to move at night, which slowed repairs even further. U.S. ordnance units operating under friendly air cover were able to stay close to the advancing line and keep tanks available. German reports from late 1944 around the Aachen sector and the approach to the Rhine recorded losses not only from enemy tanks but from artillery fighter-bomber attack and breakdown during withdrawal. At the same time, U.S. records from 1944, 1945 show that a substantial share of Shermans, initially listed as knocked out, were later repaired and returned to units, helping American armored formations maintain offensive pressure. German divisions, such as 2. Panzer Division, reported that non-combat causes, air attack fuel shortages, worn-out components, were eroding their strength. The limiting factor for Germany was a collapsing logistical system. Damaged rail lines and short fuel deliveries made it hard to move heavy spares or recovery vehicles. The American side, backed by mass production and a single highly standardized tank family, could exploit every gap that appeared. By early 1945, as Allied armies forced crossings over the Rhine and entered western Germany, the contrast was complete. U.S. armored formations were still fighting, with M4 Shermans, drawn from the same immense production run, supported by the same recovery system that had worked in Normandy. German armored units, now down to scattered Panthers and Tigers, used as local strongpoints, could not mount sustained counterattacks. In the end, the decisive number was the American ability to field, recover, and refield Shermans, on the order of 4,9,234 built, against a German force that could not replace or even retrieve its more sophisticated tanks, under air pressure. That is exactly what your title says. German crews laughed at the Sherman when they judged only gun and armor, but numbers and recovery rolled them back. The U.S. system, mass production, standardized parts, and forward recovery, outlasted Germany's focus on individual tank superiority. The number that matters is 4,9,234. Shermans, a scale that German industry and logistics could not match. German contempt for the Sherman, based on gun and armor tables, proved short-sighted. The war in the West was decided by availability and repair, not set-piece duels, as American tanks rolled steadily toward victory. In spring 1945, U.S. armored divisions fighting with M4 Shermans pushed across western Germany and closed the war's final phase. Because the United States had built about 4,9,2,3,4 Shermans between February 1942 and July 1945, and because recovery and maintenance units moved with the advance American formations under Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley's 12th Army Group, alongside other Allied forces, could keep tanks in the line even after hard fighting. German armored forces reduced to fragments of once strong units such as 2, Panzer Division and 116. Panzer Division were worn down by fuel shortages, broken transport lines, and Allied air power. Germany's roughly 5,976 Panthers and fewer than 2,000 Tigers, already scattered over multiple fronts, were increasingly lost to non-combat causes. Vehicles damaged, or short of fuel, were sometimes abandoned during withdrawals. Crews who had mocked Shermans around Caen in 1944 were now hunting for fuel and ammunition just to stay mobile. Across the Rhine, U.S. tankers drove through ruined towns, Shermans clattering over rubble. Shermans armed with the 76mm gun, now far more common, gave U.S. crews a better chance against German armor at typical 1,945 engagement ranges and narrowed the gap with Panthers. After clashes, M32 recovery vehicles and other Sherman-based support machines towed damaged tanks, mobility kills, track damage, penetrated but repairable hulls, back to mobile depots. Because Sherman components were standardized across many variants, ordnance teams could return a good share of these vehicles to service within a few days. German recovery, by 1945, was far weaker. Scarce Panthers had to move under threat of Allied aircraft. Damaged bridges slowed everything, and some Panthers that suffered mechanical failures were left to serve as static strongpoints. Under these conditions, German logistics, already strained by bombed rail lines, could not provide replacements fast enough. German tankers in the Ruhr sector could see the pattern. Shermans that had been knocked out earlier in the week were back in the battalion count, while German tanks lost to breakdown, air attack, or fuel shortage did not return. U.S. ordnance reports from 1945 show that a substantial portion of Shermans classed as mobility killed were repaired and reissued, helping to sustain the offensive pace. German reports from late-war armored units, including remnants of Panzer Lehr, recorded losses from airstrikes, artillery, and mechanical failure, as well as from enemy tanks. Allied air superiority forced German recovery to night movement, which further reduced the number of vehicles that could be saved. The American system, with recovery and repair embedded close behind the fighting line, kept Shermans available for combined arms attacks that overran local German strongpoints. As U.S. forces closed the Ruhr pocket, in April 1945, German armored resistance thinned out. Panthers and the remaining Tigers, once symbols of German armored superiority, were found abandoned on roadsides or in woods because there was no fuel, no tow, or no safe route back. American armored units, supported by a single highly standardized tank family, kept their strength up through repair. The Sherman's comparatively simple modular design allowed component swaps under field conditions. The Panther's more complex automotive systems were far harder to restore in a collapsing rear area. The decisive fact remained that the U.S. could keep putting Shermans back into the fight, while Germany could not do the same with its Panthers. In the end, the early German laughter at the Sherman, built on gun caliber and armor thickness, gave way to the operational truth. Your title captures numbers and recovery rolled them back. The U.S. advantage, 49234, Sherman standardized for repair, with recovery units moving directly behind the fighting line, proved decisive. German crews' early disdain, based on gun and armor tables, missed the operational truth wars on the Western Front in 1944. 1945 were won by systems, not duels, and the Sherman system kept coming until the end. In May 1945, when Germany surrendered, Western Front battlefields were littered with abandoned Panthers and Tigers, evidence of a strategy that could not be sustained under Allied air power and collapsing logistics. The United States' wartime production of about 49234 M4 Shermans February 1942, July 1945 had carried Allied armored forces through Normandy, across France, and into Germany. Under Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley's 12th Army Group, American tank units could put vehicles back into the line after damage, something German formations, such as 2. Panzer Division or Panzerlehr Division, increasingly could not do in 1944, 1945. Germany's roughly 5,976 Panthers and fewer than 2,000 Tigers, formidable in 1944, were worn down by fuel shortages, bombed rail lines, and the need to retreat. When such vehicles were immobilized, they were often lost. Across ruined German towns, U.S. tankers examined abandoned Panthers and noted how powerful and how complex they were. By 1945, Shermans with 76mm guns gave U.S. crews a better chance against German armor at normal combat ranges, but the real U.S. strength was still simplicity, because Sherman components, powertrain suspension, running gear, were standardized across many variants. Field depots could return a good share of damaged vehicles to service within a few days. M32 recovery vehicles built on the same Sherman chassis towed out mobility-killed tanks so they were not lost. German recovery hampered by few Panthers by fuel shortages and by Allied fighter bombers often had to leave damaged Panthers where they lay. Under those conditions, major mechanical work on a Panther was difficult to perform in the field. German veterans after the war acknowledged the pattern. Shermans that had been knocked out reappeared in unit strength reports, while German tanks lost to breakdown, air attack, or lack of fuel did not come back. U.S. Ordnance reports from 1944, 1945 show that a substantial proportion of mobility-killed Shermans were repaired and reissued, which helped American armored battalions stay effective from Normandy to the Rhine. German divisions, such as 116 Panzer Division, reported losses from airstrikes and mechanical failure, as well as from tank combat, especially as the transport network inside Germany degraded. The German approach, high-performance individual tanks, could not keep pace with a U.S. system designed to repair and replace quickly. Post-war analysis made the lesson obvious: logistics outweighed raw technical advantage. Germany's 7.5 centimeters KBUK 42 liters 70 remained a very dangerous gun, but it could not compensate for an army that could not recover or refuel its tanks. The United States, with depots built up in the United Kingdom, with air-protected supply lines across the continent, and with one main tank family to support, could field Shermans day after day. German crews who had mocked the Sherman in June 1944 had underestimated what stood behind it. Mass production, standardized spares, forward recovery. The number that matters is 49234, a scale that German engineering could not match, and that carried the Sherman and the Allied advance to victory.